All right, well, let's get going here. Ugh. That was a terrible idea, sitting down. Okay, I'm Pam Dingle, and this session is on Authentication Context and the ACR, whether Authentication Context as a technical control in SAML and OpenID Connect works or doesn't work. So just to get a level set of the room, if not even seeing my presentation yet, if I were to just say ACR or Authentication Context, how many people here have a sense of what that is? Okay, all right, that's good. And hopefully some people are, why would you come to a session if you don't know what the title stands for, I guess, right? So it sounds like we're all kind of have a level set, but of course we'll go through the basics and then we'll talk. Because this is a fairly deep technical topic, we're not going to go deep down into the weeds. But if we get through it quickly, because everyone's sort of on the same page, then we can talk about some of the fun, deeply technical stuff. Okay, is that working? Okay. I've been having clicker issues. Again. It's probably the same clicker. Right then. Fine. So for those of you who haven't met me yet, my name is Pamela Dingle, and I run the Identity Standards team at Microsoft. So our team goes out into various standards bodies, including, but not limited to, IETF, the FIDO Alliance, W3C, Decentralized Identity Foundation, OpenID Foundation, and a bunch more. So we have this amazing privilege of being able to work with standards experts from all over the world to try to write the next generation of standards. So, and by the way, a ton of folks sort of current and previously on my team are here, including Mike Jones and Christina Yasuda and Tim Capelli. So some of the folks who've been on the team, now or previously. Okay, now comes the fun part. Are you ready? This is audience participation. Yes. All right. You need to all think about the vegetable you hate, like the one you hate the most. The one that when you were a kid, you would stick it on the side of your cheek and wait and go to the bathroom and spit it out. That vegetable, that thing you hate more than anything else, but you have to eat. You're forced to eat. This one's mine, Brussels sprouts. I may have adopted this actually from my husband. Yeah, Brussels sprouts represent exactly what the heck is with these things. Dear heavens. All right. So now you've got it in your mind. You're thinking of that thing, that horrible, horrible taste. Now let's assume that not only do you hate it, but it hates you. You have a deadly allergy to that vegetable. If it comes near your food, if you put it in your mouth, you could take an ambulance and maybe even not even have a chance to take an ambulance. You could just drop dead on the spot. That's how deadly that vegetable is. So what happens when you have that kind of allergy? And by the way, I don't have allergies, and I'm not a medical representative of any kind, so please don't take this as actual allergy advice, whatever you do. But what happens when you're in that situation? You are deadly allergic to a vegetable that occurs naturally in foods, right? It's in stores, it's in restaurants. It can be ground up and unrecognizable potentially in the food you eat. What happens? Well, there's really two things that have to happen if you need to avoid that vegetable under all costs, right? The first thing you need are acceptable alternatives. So there's no point in going to Brussels sprouts R Us for dinner and trying not to have Brussels sprouts. You need to know that you have something else that can still feed you and make sure that you have nutrition. That's number one. So acceptable alternatives. The second is strict kitchen hygiene. So it's not good enough to go to a restaurant and order something that you think doesn't have your vegetable in it, if in fact it's going to be cooked in the same pot in the kitchen in the back. So the strict hygiene is a safety necessity if you want to stay alive, if you want a guarantee of staying alive. If you're willing to wing it, you don't need this. If you're only a little allergic, you don't need this. But if it's a life or death situation, then you have to know how that kitchen operates, or you have to have some kind of assurances of how that kitchen operates. So 2 things: acceptable alternatives, strict kitchen hygiene. So let's do a little swim lane. So there you are on the right-hand side. You are the relying party in this situation, meaning you are relying on someone to bring you food that does not kill you and also to sustain you. Those 2 things are true. So the right-hand side, so the food is going to move from left to right, much like we draw single sign-on diagrams. What a coincidence that is, right? So you're walking into a restaurant, and the first thing you're going to do is sit down and look at the menu. You're going to say, oh, are there acceptable alternatives on the menu? You have to look at that and say yes or no. If literally everything has Brussels sprouts, then you might want to leave and go to a different restaurant. So that's your first question, is determine the acceptable alternatives. Second, you actually need to make an order. And you're probably going to order with the front of house staff, meaning the waiter. You're going to ask for, you're going to basically claim 2 things. You're going to say, I would like the carrots du jour, and I am deadly allergic to Brussels sprouts. You have to specify those 2 things. If you forget to mention the deadly Brussels sprout allergy, then of course they may not know that the kitchen hygiene they need to apply is more stringent than usual. So you're with me so far, right? So this is essentially a request being made now to the front of house staff. Now they're going to fulfill that order in the kitchen. And at that time, they have to enforce that kitchen hygiene. So you need to know that the order is going to come through correctly. You need to know that the context is being preserved from the waiter who took your order to the person who's actually preparing that food. So in this case, you can think of this as 2 nested requests, right? Where you're making a request of the waiter and then a request of the kitchen staff. And they are the ones who actually are on the hook to execute, to make sure that the thing you come out with is Brussels sprout free. And then you're going to get the meal served back to you, right? Which is a response that comes back that is theoretically correct. Now here's the problem. This happens everywhere. We see it all the time. People think that this is the end of the swim lane. This is not the end of the swim lane. In the same way that if you do order a meal and say you are deadly allergic to Brussels sprouts, and what they bring you is a steaming bowl piled this high of Brussels sprouts, the question is, are you going to eat it? And so this last step is super important. You have to do the sanity check to say, are there visible Brussels sprouts in my meal? And this is essentially an equivalent in the federation or single sign-on world of validating the assertion that comes back to you. And you would be shocked at how many times people don't do it. They just accept whatever comes back. They parse a statement. They act on the statement as if it's true, but they haven't checked that it's actually come from the authority they think it's come from, or whether it's been spoofed altogether. So the sanity check is a huge part of authentication context processing and staying alive in restaurants. So you might be wondering, why is this person up here talking about allergies when she, A, doesn't even have allergies, and B, this is an identity conference. But the real truth of the matter is that some organizations have a deadly breach allergy. So the same emotion you feel towards that vegetable that you hate so much, that's essentially passwords. Huh? See what I did there? You see? You will forevermore associate passwords with the vegetable you hate. Yes. So everything I just said all applies when you are an organization that has to depend on someone else to authenticate your users. And you absolutely have to know that certain security controls are in place at the time that the user authenticates. So let's talk about the actual technical definition of authentication context. This is from the SAML 2.0, 15th of March, 2005 specification. This is not a new concept, right? So let's just read it quick, right? It is the information additional to the authentication assertion itself, flying, that the relying party may require before it makes an entitlements decision with respect to an authentication assertion. Such context may include, but is not limited to, the actual authentication method used. So this is how you get to request that your users be authenticated with a phishing-resistant credential, for example, or that it has to comply to NIST 863 AAL2. So you basically are making the same request of the party that is authenticating your user as an identity administrator who has a resource that you're trying to protect. You're making the same request when you ask for an authentication context from your authenticating party as you are when you're in the restaurant. Acceptable alternatives. So you can't just say, don't send me passwords if they have nothing but passwords on the menu, and strict kitchen hygiene. They have to be willing to assert and attest that they can keep passwords out of the flow. And by the way, the R in ACR stands for class reference. So Authentication Context Class Reference. And the reason for that is when we talk about ACRs, we're really talking about an identifier. It's a string that stands for a business process. So when I say MFA or PHR, that's really a shorthand for you will authenticate the user with multi-factor authentication. So the reference is essentially that string. And I know if I say it wrong that people in the audience will stand up and say so, because there's some very, very knowledgeable people in this subject in the audience. Are we for time? Okay, good. So let's take that same idea, right? And we're going to just adapt it now to authentication context, right? So your acceptable alternatives might be things like a multi-factor crypto device. They might be an OTP device, right? All of the things you're seeing on the left, by the way, all of those specific terms are coming from the NIST 863 standards. They have defined these things. They have actually defined both the acceptable alternatives and the hygiene, which is amazing. I mean, it was sort of a big epiphany for me when I went back and read the standards, right? So, they have another section here that talks about replay resistance and authentication intent, which probably aren't well known here, but really those are the things that make up the security hygiene behind you asking for a given security control to be enforced. So I really recommend, if you haven't seen the new version of NIST Special Publication 800-63, especially version B, which is what this is coming from, I really recommend that you read it. It's so far ahead of its time and has been for. It stays ahead of its time. This is version 4 of a spec that has been evolving pretty well since I've been in identity. I think the first one was out 2003, something like that. Anyways, very, very well worth reading. But the important thing is what they're setting up are these terms, right? The terms have meaning. The terms tell you what you're asking for and how to determine whether you've succeeded at asking for it. So it's really worth coming through and reading all of those terms. Now, you may not want to use all these terms. You may be perfectly happy requesting a security control that's just MFA. I don't care if it's these fancy ones. Give me anything that's something you have and something you know, right? Possession and inherence. Whatever those things are. And so there are shorthands that we have right now. MFA is one of them, 3 letters. You can ask for MFA. And you're going to get somebody's interpretation of MFA. That's the downside. You're going to ask for PHR, phishing resistance. You're going to get somebody's interpretation of phishing resistance. If you go farther, if you look, for example, into higher education, now you're getting into truly defined authentication contexts. They actually have documents that will say exactly if I ask for a REFEDS MFA authentication context, that is documented. Like, these folks have it down. The rest of us, not so much. All right, so now let's just go back through those restaurant steps super quick. So when you're checking that menu for the alternative, we call that discovery, right? That is OpenID Connect discovery. There's a document that's well known, a JSON format, standardized. You can look up what's on the menu, right? Next up, you're making your request. Easy. I'm allergic to passwords. Please give me one of either a phishing resistant or multi-factor credential. Right. And then the execution. So now whoever is authenticating your user is going to go and make sure that they can enforce the security control that you have requested. So again, if we say it's got to be PHR or MFA, then If they have authenticated that user with 2 factors, that's good enough. They don't have to do PHR. It's preferred. And that's sort of what the statement of PHR, MFA is that PHR, whatever comes first is preferred. What comes second is good enough, right? So they're going to fulfill that. And then they're going to come back with a response. And that response is going to say, hey, we did authentication using multi-factor authentication. And that claim that you have fulfilled that security control will be a claim inside the ACR in OpenID Connect, or the Authentication Context claim in the assertion. So it is signed. It is as night and day as possible is to be able to say that, yes, I am claiming that this is a phishing-resistant auth. And then, most importantly, you have to do the validation. Is the signature right? Did it come from the issuer I think it came from? Does it literally claim to have passwords in it when I told them I was allergic to passwords? If so, I need to reject my token, and I need to not let the session occur. Okay, so all of this is very hairy-fairy, up in the air. Let's look at a real, actual request. So this is step 2 in that swim lane, right? And what you can see is that you can see a lot of XML. It's a little bit wordier than OpenID Connect, but where the purple is here is your requested authent context. So this chunk needs to go into your authentication request protocol, and it needs to describe an authentication context class ref of carrots or multi-factor authentication. So this is very simple. This is not rocket science. You are going to include this string inside of a specific standardized element in the request, and then you are expecting to get back an assertion that contains the claim that confirms that they did what you asked. So that's it. That's all it is. It's simple, and yet it's not well adopted today, except in higher ed, because, like I said, they got it right. Here's OpenID Connect, same idea. This is the request. So in this one, you can see it's a much shorter string, right? You've got a little string that says ACR underscore values equals, and then it's a space-separated string of a preference first list of what you want, right? PHR space MFA. So give me PHR if you got it. If you can't do PHR, I'll accept MFA. One of those 2 things has to occur, has to be in the ACR claim when the assertion is issued. All right, so that's the easy stuff. That's the definition of how it works. It has worked this way for a very long time. SAML is 20 years old almost. OpenID Connect is, I think, 10? Not quite 10, I think. 10. All right, there you go. 10. We're old. So these things were defined at the time because the authors knew that there was a need. Here's the issue. The issue is that I don't think, this goes right back to the SAML is dead conversation, which is quite entertaining. I think that nobody thought SAML and OpenID Connect would end up working side by side the way they do today. And I'm sure lots of people were smart enough to realize this would happen. But what's essentially happened in our access management world is that SAML fills a certain niche, and OpenID Connect fills a certain niche. When OpenID Connect was created, the authors made a choice to change just slightly the processing of an ACR. So in SAML, SAML basically has the deadly vegetable interpretation, which is if I ask for phishing resistance, right, I will never return you anything except a phishing-resistant credential. I will die before I send you a bowl full of steaming broccoli or steaming Brussels sprouts, right? So we call that essential processing. Like you are considering that request an essential part of the assertion, and you're not going to get an assertion if you cannot fulfill that security control. What OpenID Connect does is it defines this same idea, this concept of ACR values, by default as voluntary. And so what that means is that if I can do phishing resistance for you, I will. If I can do MFA for you, I will. If all I can do is password, then I will still give you an assertion. I will send you an assertion back, and I will just tell you, sorry, all you get is password. And then you, the relying party who's consuming this, has to make a decision as to whether that's good enough or not. So it's a very reasonable, logical way to do the processing. And there's nothing wrong with voluntary processing. The problem we have is that the two things are different. And what we're seeing now is that you all want to set a policy that says, I want to have a federated connection. You don't want to care whether it's OpenID Connect or SAML. You want to be able to say, I want this thing to happen, and you want it all to happen underneath. And what's happened is that there's confusion over which type of processing it will be. We have concerns about whether people are correctly doing that sanity check at the end. And so that's just caused us some issues. So I have 5 minutes left. So we're going to go through this fairly quickly. There's a list of 4 or 5 things that make it difficult right now for anyone to use authentication context at scale. And we are trying in the standards world to fix those problems. So I have, you can see that in the deck, I've got all the section references to the SAML specification. You're really looking at section 3.3.2.2 on the SAML side, and you're looking at section 5.5.1.1. I hope you're all going to memorize that. Right, but this is, ultimately this is, we're going into the specs, we're talking about all the bits and pieces, and most importantly, the OpenID Connect definition of the ACR values claim is the one that's, causing us issues. So here's what we are going to do with it. We have issues, we know we have issues, not only with the dance, I call the dance the request and response from SAML, but with the values we're asking for. Again, what is MFA? I mean, if you want to spend 3 hours talking about something, what is MFA is as good a topic as any. So here's what I think we should do, and what I think I have gotten a lot of agreement on. Although you never know when standards efforts are funny beasts. They can often take interesting turns. These are the 3 things I think needs to happen. First of all, we need to fix the dance. And again, it's not broken, it's inconsistent. And so what we are proposing for number 1 is a little shim specification. And all it does is makes it super easy to interpret in OpenID Connect an ACR value that is essential instead of voluntary. All of it exists, it's just harder to do in the specification, and so we're trying to simplify it. What we probably will do, what you can see, I do have a link to a GitHub here. We've taken 2 stabs at it so far and gotten a ton of feedback that it won't work. So we are trying to go to a third version of how we can make this work. The issue we have is that this stuff is all set and forget. So it's wonderful if we can make fancy, beautiful new specifications, but if no OpenID Connect provider will actually implement it, it doesn't work. And so we're trying to find something simple that doesn't break what happens now. And since I have probably 2 minutes at this point, I am not going to talk too much further about it. That's the first one, fixing the dance. Here's the second one, the semantics. We know that you're going to want to ask for security controls more than just phishing resistance and MFA. So, but we're in this awful position where we keep talking about first factors and second factors. Well, is that first in measure of importance, or is that first in measure of order? Well, I don't know, right? Different people interpret it different ways. So my proposal is to try to refine these semantic interpretations. There is a specification called IETF 8176 that defines some of these 3-letter terms, which is why you see all the 3-letter terms. But things like, for example, a PIN. What's a PIN? Can someone tell me which thing is a PIN? Well, let's define it more. Are we talking about a local PIN, right, that's set? Are we talking about a centralized PIN? Because a centralized PIN is probably not really a good idea, whereas a local PIN actually has really interesting security characteristics, right? A hardware device, a software secured key, right? And then there's the biometric bubble. Very interesting. There is no biometric listed as an authentication context in the NIST 863 documentation. At least I don't think so. But there are factors listed in 87.116. So we got to iron that out. We got to get it to the point where I get off the stage, apparently. But yes, this diagram needs to be debated. The right things need to go in the inner circle and in the outer circle. And I think that can start happening, and that's going to take a really long time. But we need to get people talking about it. And then the last piece is this idea of being able to automate and certify at scale. So no more uniquely negotiated one-off federations done thousands of times by administrators, one after the other, right? We need a system for this. We need to be able to know what things are, know when to ask, and ask for it in a button push. So yeah, I don't know how that's going to happen. I have no plans for that. But if we get to here, then we're already successful. If we get through 1 and 2, then I will be over the moon. And that's it. Thank you. I really appreciate it.